Okay, now as usual, let us start off with a few minutes of meditation. Yeah, just relax, make yourself comfortable. Yeah, check your sitting position, straighten your back, upright but not uptight. Imagine a string on top of your head pulling you up. Roll back your shoulders, align to your ears and shoulders, relax. Close your eyes or half open, half close, or open your eyes, up to you. Just relax and focus on your breath. Yeah, the small area above your lips. If you need to count 1 from 10, please do so at your own pace. Just focus on your breath. Yeah. Okay. Focus on your breath. Relax. Any wandering thoughts, that's fine. Just let it go. Just observe and let it go. And then just gently bring your attention back to your breaths. Okay. Now, when we're focusing on just one object of meditation, we are doing calmness or tranquility or samatha meditation. So just focus on our breath. Okay, now that we are sufficiently focused, let us be more mindful of the qualities of our breath. Just check gently. Is it an in-breath or an out-breath? Is it a long breath or a short breath? Is it a heavy breath or a light breath? Check again. Is it an in-breath or an out-breath? A long breath or a short breath? A heavy breath or a light breath? When we check on the qualities of our breath, we're practicing mindfulness, right? Mindfulness meditation. Now let's be mindful how our breath affects our body. For example, how our abdomen rises or expands when breathing in, and how our abdomen contracts or falls when breathing out. Check again how our breath affects our body, right? Rising, falling, rising, falling. Now check if our breath is calming our body, that is making it more relaxed. Check again if our breath is calming our body, making it more relaxed. As we observe our breaths, be mindful of their impermanence, flowing nature, moments of rising and falling, flowing nature, moments of rising and falling. When we perceive our breaths as they are, impermanent and ever-changing, be mindful of the suffering that arises from being attached to them, and being mindful that there is no permanent, substantial self. As we observe our breath, Be mindful, therefore, of the three universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self. So just continue to be mindful of our breath. We are also practicing mindfulness of body, right? When we are mindful of our breath. If our mindfulness is good, we should have a calm body with stillness pervading throughout our body. Okay, now let us bring our mind to be mindful of our feelings. As we breathe, continue focusing on our breath, and then just check on our feelings. Do you experience a sense of pleasure? A sense of displeasure? Or a sense of neither pleasure nor displeasure? Be mindful that feelings may lead to unwholesomeness. For example, pleasant feelings may lead to attachment or greed. Unpleasant feelings to aversion or anger. And neutral feelings to delusion, manifesting as apathy or complacency. Let's be mindful of our feelings again. Is it a sense of pleasure? A sense of displeasure? Or a sense of neither pleasure nor displeasure? As we observe our feelings, be mindful of their impermanence, flowing nature, moments of rising and falling. Flowing nature, moments of rising and falling. When we perceive our feelings as they are, impermanent and ever-changing, be mindful of the suffering that arises from being attached to them, and be mindful that there is no permanent substantial self. As we observe our feelings, be mindful, therefore, of the three universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self. When our mindfulness of feelings is good, we should have both a calm body and a calm mind. So we've practiced calm meditation. We have then moved on to mindfulness of breath or mindfulness of body, then the mindfulness of feelings. Now let us practice mindfulness of our mind. Bring our mind to be mindful of the states of mind or the emotions that we have as we breathe. Check if our mind states or emotions are stable or unstable, wholesome or unwholesome. As we breathe, check our states of mind or emotions, stable or unstable, wholesome or unwholesome. As our mind becomes calmer, more stable and more concentrated, we will experience increasing equanimity. We can assess the stability and concentration of our mind by asking such questions as, is it an agitated and restless mind or a calm and peaceful mind? An agitated and restless mind or a calm and peaceful mind? A heavy mind or a light mind? A heavy mind or a light mind? A dull mind or a radiant mind? A dull mind or a radiant mind? A lazy mind or an energetic mind? A lazy mind or an energetic mind? As our mind becomes more wholesome, we will advance further towards liberating our mind. We can assess the wholesomeness of our mind by asking such questions as, is it a greedy mind or a generous mind? A greedy mind or a generous mind? An angry mind or a loving mind? An angry mind or a loving mind? A deluded mind or a wise mind? Deluded mind or a wise mind? An arrogant mind or humble mind? Arrogant mind or humble mind? A jealous mind or a joyful mind? Jealous mind or a joyful mind? A vengeful mind or a compassionate mind? A vengeful mind or a compassionate mind? A mind of doubt or a mind of faith? A mind of doubt or a mind of faith? As we observe our states of mind or our emotions, be mindful of their impermanence, flowing nature, moments of rising and falling. Flowing nature, moments of rising and falling. When we perceive our states of mind or emotions as they are, impermanent and ever-changing, be mindful of the suffering that arises from being attached to them, and be mindful that there is no permanent substantial self. As we observe our states of mind or our emotions, be mindful, therefore, of the three universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self. When our mindfulness of mind, states of mind or emotions is good, we'll have both a calm body and a calm mind, suffused with equanimity and wholesomeness. Okay, very good. We've started off with calmness, meditation, moving on to mindfulness of breath or mindfulness of body, then mindfulness of feelings, and then mindfulness of our states of mind or emotions. Okay, so we have calm body, calm mind, equanimity, and wholesomeness. Yes, please gently open your eyes. And I think we're now ready for the Dhamma talk. Okay. All right, so let us move on. Yes, today we're talking about the third and fourth noble truths, the end of suffering, and the path leading to the end of suffering, right? We will start off with a short introduction, reviewing lecture 2, the second noble truth, cause of suffering. Then we'll move on to the third noble truth, end of suffering. We'll look at Nibbana or Nirvana, 7 expressions. Nibbana or Nirvana, 2 ways of understanding. Then happiness through happiness. After which we'll move on to the fourth noble truth, the noble path, the noble eightfold path and the middle way. and looking at morality, right speech, right action, right livelihood, and faith and the precepts of morality. Okay, so this is what we are going to cover this evening. Okay, so a quick introduction reviewing from last lecture. Yeah, we talk about the second noble truth, the cause of suffering, three kinds of craving for objects of sense desire, for existence, for non-existence. We talk about four kinds of grasping or attachment or clinging to objects of sense desire, to views, to rites and rituals, and to doctrine of the self. Then we talk about the fundamental cause being ignorance or delusion. Subsequently, we moved on to take a look at the final of the three universal characteristics, not self, beginning with how was the self understood in ancient India during the times of the Buddha, and then how the Buddha criticized this notion of self and came up with not self. We discussed its significance in Buddhism. We also look at conventional truth and ultimate truth. To better understand the concept of not self, we then move on to talk about the five aggregates, a conceptual understanding. We look at body, or the physical factor, the aggregate of form. We look at mind, consisting of four mental factors, the aggregates of feelings, that's the emotive or affective dimension, perceptions, that's the conceptual dimension, mental formations, that's the moral dimension, and consciousness, that's the awareness dimension. Right? Then we look at the five aggregates and the three universal characteristics, their relationships, yeah, permanence, suffering, not self, and application in daily life. Then we ended with Master Thich Nhat Hanh's teaching, transformation of suffering to happiness, looking at how the second noble truth could be applied in daily life, how we can apply the understanding of not self in daily life, and the five aggregates and their application in daily life. So that's what we covered last week. So out of the four noble truths, so far we've finished the first two noble truths on the nature of suffering and the cause of suffering, and we've finished three universal truths, right? Because we have not fully understood and realized the three universal truths, that's why we are still in this cycle of birth and death, right? Samsara. So this evening and next evening, we're moving on to the third and fourth noble truths. Yeah, we're climbing up the stairs. Yeah, we'll start off by talking about the third noble truth, which is the end of suffering, and that's Nibbana. And then we will move on to take a look at the fourth noble truth, which is the Noble Eightfold Path. Yeah, the flight of steps leading us from where we are now to Nibbana. So this is what we are going to do tonight and next week. So let us take a look at the third noble truth, the end of suffering. In the text, it is said, this is the noble truth of the cessation or the end of suffering, the complete fading away and end of this very thirst, yeah, is abandoning, relinquishing, releasing, letting go. Well, when we talk about the truth of the end of suffering, that is, of course, the goal of the Buddhist path. Yeah, the Buddha once said, just as the ocean, although vast, is of one taste, the taste of salt, so also his teaching. Although there are many aspects of the teaching, and although the teachings are as vast as the ocean, they are all of one taste, the taste of Nibbana, right? So here we're the third noble truth, the end of suffering, which is Nibbana. So the ocean, yeah, represent only one taste, the taste of Nibbana, from whichever many angles that we may practice, yeah, the many rivers that subsequently end in this ocean of the end of suffering, Nibbana. Now, the end of suffering is very broad in scope. We can talk about it in three levels, at three levels. The first level is the end of suffering here and now in this life. And then the second level is happiness and good fortune in future lives, in our future lives. And then the third level is the experience of Nibbana itself. So the first two levels, happiness in this life and happiness in future lives, represent worldly or mundane happiness. And the third level, happiness of liberation, represents ultimate or supramundane happiness. So let's just briefly talk about these three levels of happiness. So happiness in this life, yeah, of course, when we practice Buddhism in this life, it can lead to happiness of a material nature in the sense of improving our physical conditions. It can also lead us to happiness of our inner nature, yeah, in the sense of having greater peace of mind. So these are concrete benefits that we can experience happiness in this life. This is one dimension of the end of suffering. And because it is of this life, it is quite similar to what Christianity calls the kingdom of God on earth, right? So happiness in this life. When we practice Buddhist teachings, we can experience happiness in this life. Now, practicing Buddhism can also lead to happiness and good fortune in our future lives. Yeah, because when we practice Buddhism, we are doing good, and this can lead to rebirth in the higher realms, right? In fortunate circumstances where we can enjoy happiness, prosperity, health, well-being, and success, whether as a human being on this earth or as a celestial being in the heavens. Okay, so this is what we mean by happiness in future lives, to be reborn again as a human being or as a celestial being in the heavens. So this dimension of the end of suffering is similar to the heaven, similar to the heaven of other religions. Yeah. So that's the second level, happiness in future lives. And third, we can talk about happiness of liberation, and that's, of course, Nibbana or enlightenment. This is the total, ultimate end of all suffering, the ultimate goal of Buddhism. And this ultimate goal can be attainable here and now or in future lives. All right, so these are the three levels of happiness that we can talk about. Happiness in this life, happiness in future lives, or happiness of liberation. So in the third and fourth noble truths, we are talking about transforming our suffering to happiness. That's why we're talking about happiness, yeah? So still on the topic of happiness, let us talk about happiness of morality and happiness of mental purity, right? And this can be achieved by the summary of Buddhist teachings: avoid evil, do good, purify the mind, right? So to avoid all evil, to cultivate good, and to purify one's mind, this is the teaching of the Buddhas from Dhammapada, a Buddhist text. Now, a mind that is morally bad or unwholesome is a mind that suffers. Yeah. So in contrast, a mind that is morally good or wholesome is a mind that is happy. Therefore, when we observe moral conduct or ethical discipline by avoiding evil and doing good, we will be able to transform unwholesome behavior to wholesome behavior. And in the process, we will be able to attain the happiness of morality. Okay, so of course, that's one of the benefits of putting the Buddhist teachings into practice to transform our suffering, unwholesomeness, represented on the left in red, to wholesomeness, yeah, happiness, peace, calm, and other positive virtues represented by yellow. And in doing so, we will experience the happiness of morality. Now, purifying our mind will also bring about the happiness of mental purity. And this is associated with the happiness of a calm, clear, and compassionate mind. So when we practice meditation, we are on our way towards a calm, clear, and compassionate mind. So like just now, right? We started off with calmness meditation that will lead us to a calm mind. Then we practice mindfulness meditation, mindfulness of breath, of our body, of feelings, of our states of mind or emotions that will lead to a clear mind. And when we practice metta meditation or loving kindness meditation, that will lead us to a compassionate mind. Remember, last week we ended with a few minutes of metta or loving kindness meditation. So all this will lead us to transform our self-centeredness to selflessness. All this will further develop our wisdom and direct us towards realizing the ultimate happiness of Nibbana. Okay, so as we can see in the picture here, happy people build their inner world, unhappy people blame their outer world. So Buddhism, the teachings and our practice is all about transforming our body and mind. Yeah, it is not about changing the outer world. When we transform our inner world, our body and mind, then our behavior, our actions will influence the people around us, will influence our environment. Yeah, so this is how Buddhist teachings and Buddhist practice work. Start off with ourselves, our body and mind, transform our suffering to happiness, transform unwholesomeness to wholesomeness, transform self-centeredness to selflessness. And then in the process, we will influence the people around us for the better. We will influence our environment for the better. Okay, so again, the third and fourth noble truths is all about transforming the suffering that we mentioned about in the first and second noble truth into happiness. All right. So the ultimate level of happiness is Nibbana, and let us take a look at how Nibbana has been expressed using 7 terms. Okay, so now we take a look at the 7 expressions of Nibbana or Nirvana. Nibbana is in Pali, Nirvana is in Sanskrit. So like we said earlier, the happiness of liberation, Nibbana, can be attained here and now or in future lives. And there are 7 expressions. Let us begin with the basic and standard definition of Nibbana, and that is the cessation, the end of the 3 unwholesome factors of greed, hatred, and delusion, or attachment, aversion, and ignorance, right? So all the other 6 expressions of Nibbana, there are different perspectives of understanding Nibbana as this extinguishing experience or this process of the extinction of our afflictions, of our defilements, or normally we talk about the 3 poisons or the fires of greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah, so we can see it represented by the 3 animals here: attachment or greed, aversion or anger, hatred, ignorance or delusion. So when we can end all these 3 fires or poisons, we attain Nibbana. Just like the Buddha, right? At the moment, the Buddha understood suffering is arising, its cessation, and the path leading to its cessations. These 3 fires were extinguished. So on the top right, we see the 4 noble truths, which is what we've been talking about. So someone like the Buddha who has extinguished all these 3 poisons, these 3 fires, they are described using the metaphor of being cool. Yeah. So the Buddha is cool. The Buddha has pacified the poisons, the fires are cool, pacified. Yeah. And this is the process for anyone who reach awakening, who reach enlightenment. So when we can extinguish these 3 fires, we are also cool and pacified. Yeah? So extinguishing is like blowing off, right? Extinguishing the light of a candle. So extinguishing the 3 poisons of attachment, aversion, and ignorance. So this is the most basic and standard definition and expression of Nibbana. Okay, now let's just move on to take a look at 6 other expressions of Nibbana. Well, when someone has attained Nibbana by practicing the cultivation of wholesomeness, the person will come to experience the highest wholesomeness, and that is Nibbana, right? So Nibbana is also described as the highest wholesomeness. Just like earlier on, we say, right? All of us as Buddhists, we keep on practicing, transforming unwholesomeness to wholesomeness. And in the process, we will transform suffering to happiness. We will transform self-centeredness to selflessness. So the highest wholesomeness is Nibbana. Okay, so when we experience Nibbana, we will not face any moral dilemma, or we will not face any moral struggle. There's no inclination to do what is unwholesome. There's no resistance to do what is wholesome. All our actions will be spontaneously wholesome. That's why it is called the highest wholesomeness, right? That's why Nibbana is called the highest wholesomeness. Okay, so that's the second way of understanding Nibbana, the highest wholesomeness. Now, the highest wholesomeness is attained through realizing the 3 universal characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and not self. So, when we can realize these 3 universal characteristics, these 3 Dharma seals of impermanence, suffering, and not self, we will transcend the cycle of birth, right? The cycle that leads us to be born again and again, as you can see in the right picture here. We call the 6 realms of birth and death, or rebirth. So in this case, when we talk about Nibbana, it therefore represents the end of karma. Because we have karma, right? Because we have not fully realized the 3 Dharma seals, that's why we are caught up in this wheel of life, born again and again, right? But when our karma ends, we will not be reborn in this cycle of life again, and therefore the end of karma is Nibbana. All right, so that's another way of understanding Nibbana. Now, when we realize the 3 universal characteristics, Nibbana is then known also as the highest level of knowledge. Yeah, and of course, when we talk about Nibbanic knowledge, it is not the knowledge of just a theoretical or intellectual understanding. Yeah? It is an experience. It is the final awakening to the true nature of our world of sensory experiences. We fully then understand the 5 aggregates of grasping, which we've talked about in last lecture, all right, last week. So when somebody attains Nibbana, what takes place is not a change in the nature of reality, but in the change in our perspective of the nature of reality. So what comes to an end when Nibbana is attained? It's not the world. There's nothing wrong with the world, right? The world will not come to an end when we attain Nibbana, but our wrong interpretation of the world will come to an end. It's like we are dreaming, and then when we're awake from our dream, we know that all along we're just dreaming, right? When we're awake. So when we're awakened, then we realize that our perspective of the world had been wrong. When we're awakened, this is the real world, right? And this represents the highest level of knowledge. So this is Nibbana, another way of understanding Nibbana. Okay? So what matters is therefore not the nature of the world, but the world as interpreted and constructed through the self that we think that we have, right? A permanent self, through the lens of our egocentrism, through the lens of our self-centeredness. From there, we have our views, our beliefs, our concepts, our theories, and our dogmatic assertions. So when we attain Nibbana, actually, we are letting go of all these views. So Nibbana is also expressed as freedom from views. And in this context, Master Thich Nhat Hanh tells us, for things to reveal themselves to us, we need to be ready to abandon our views about them. So let go, right? In Buddhist practice, we always say about letting go. The more we let go, the higher our level of practice or cultivation is. And if we can totally let go, then we can achieve freedom from views, and that is Nibbana. So the picture on the right is, it's just like watching a movie, right? Our mind is always full of images, concepts, all kinds of views. So let go. When you are free from views, totally free from views, that's Nirvana. Okay, when we do not realize the three universal characteristics, we're caught up in our world of repeated births and deaths. But a person who is enlightened, right, sees the absolute world and transcends this samsaric world. Therefore, the awakened one will no longer be reborn in this world. Therefore, Nibbana is also understood as world transcendence. That means transcending our mundane world. Okay, so Nibbana as interpreted as transcending our mundane world. So it is world transcendence. And this idea of world transcendence is beautifully illustrated using the symbol of the lotus flower. Yeah, in the Buddhist text, it is say, just as, O monks, the lotus born in water, grown in water, rises above the water and stands unsullied by the water. Even so, the Buddha, right, grows up in the world, rises above the world, and stays unsullied by the world. So a lotus can bloom in the mud, and when it arises, it is awakened. So it transcends the world of mud. It is world transcendence. So you're very knowledgeable now, huh? 6 expressions, 6 ways of understanding Nibbana, okay? And then finally, the 7th way of understanding Nibbana. Our world, our mundane world, of course, operates according to the principles of dependent arising, causes and conditions. It is therefore a conditioned world, right? With experiences arising from the 3 unwholesome factors: greed, anger, ignorance. Because we still have them, these causes and conditions lead us to be reborn in this world of conditions and causes. Now, Nibbana represents the one and only unconditioned experience, an experience that is free, totally free from the 3 poisons. Therefore, the Buddha said that the end of greed, anger, and delusion is the unconditioned. Therefore, all samsaric experience is conditioned and suffering, and Nibbana is unconditioned and free of suffering. Okay, so this is the 7th way of understanding or expressing Nibbana. So in this regard, we see greed, anger, and delusion are conditioning, limiting factors. Their absence means the presence of generosity, loving kindness, compassion, wisdom. So generosity, loving kindness, and compassion, wisdom, they are unconditioning factors. They are factors that they will free our mind from all that is unwholesome and lead us ultimately to the unconditioned, which is Nibbana. Okay? All right, so here we have 7 definitions, 7 ways of expressing Nibbana. Okay, so let us quickly go through again. The first expression is the end of the 3 unwholesome factors of greed, hatred, and delusion. The second, Nibbana is the highest wholesomeness. The third, Nibbana represents the end of karma. The fourth, Nibbana is the highest level of knowledge. The fifth, Nibbana means freedom from views. The sixth, Nibbana, it is world transcendence. And the seventh, Nibbana is the unconditioned. Okay, now when somebody attains Nibbana, right, there are 2 ways of looking at it. So, and this is Nibbana with the remainder of life. when a person is still alive, like the historical Buddha, right? He started practicing at the age of 29. He attained Nibbana at the age of 35, and then he lived until 80. So for the 45 years after he attained Nibbana, this is called Nibbana with the remainder of life. And then when he passes on at the age of 80, we are talking about Nibbana without remainder of life. So let us quickly just take a look at these two terms, right? Nibbana with the remainder of life and Nibbana without the remainder of life. Okay, so when we talk about someone who is in Nibbana with the remainder of life, like for instance, an Arahant, Sariputta on the left, right? He's a great Arahant. We're saying that his 5 aggregates of physical and mental phenomenon, and therefore his 6 sense organs, that is our body and mind, still remain and still function. Yeah, our body then is still subject to the pain that is associated with a body, right? So this person, even though he has experienced Nibbana, he still experiences painful events and difficult situations because he still has body and mind. But of course, being completely freed from greed, aversion, and delusion, while he may have bodily pain, bodily suffering, his mind does not suffer. Just like the historical Buddha, after Nibbana, he experienced all kinds of bodily suffering, right? Associated with illness, aging, and finally death. But his mind, is above all this suffering, okay? Because his mind is free from greed, anger, and delusion. So he continues to live in the world with the difference that all his thoughts, words, and action are completely freed from greed, anger, and delusion. And all his words, thoughts, and actions are motivated instead entirely by generosity, loving kindness, and compassion, and wisdom. Okay, so somebody who attains Nibbana while alive, this is what we call Nibbana with the remainder of life. Just like the historical Buddha, for 45 years, he experienced this Nibbana with the remainder of life. Now, Nibbana without remainder of life, what of it? Of course, eventually, right? The remainder of life, which is our body and mind, the 5 aggregates, they will be exhausted. And like all beings, such a person who attains Nibbana must pass away, must die, right? So when the 5 aggregates, our body and mind are discarded for good, when the 5 aggregates break up at the last moment of the Arahant's life, when he passes away, we can say that the Arahant is in Nibbana without remainder of life. So unlike other beings who will be reborn, the Arahant will not be reborn again. So instead of being reborn, the Arahant Parinibbana, meaning that the 5 aggregates come to a final ending, right? Parinibbana. And that also means final Nibbana. And in this context, it takes place in this very life, right? The last moment when the Arahant or when the Buddha passes away, the Arahant Buddha achieves Parinibbana. So Parinibbana is not achieved after we die, right? It is achieved at the last moment before we passed away. So like the Buddha who fully passes away through Nibbana without remainder of life. So perhaps in this context, it may be different from other religions whose final goals can be achieved only after death, right? To be reborn, let's say in heaven, together with God, perhaps. But in the Buddhist context, we experience final Nibbana while we're still alive before we pass away. Okay, so here we are saying that the Arahant or the Buddha passes away into the unconditioned, like we've said earlier. Now, the term unconditioned may be hard to understand, right? May be difficult to understand. So often we use more vivid language. We use metaphor, describing Nibbana as the end of the road, the destination at the end of the road, the country of no birth, the city of Nibbana, the place of the highest happiness, peaceful, lovely, happy, without suffering, without fear, without sickness, free from old age, free from death. So there are different ways of describing Nibbana, like we have said earlier, right? Either as something that is non-affirmative, the end, of karma, the end of greed, anger, or delusion, or something more positive, right? The highest wholesomeness, the highest happiness, peaceful, lovely, no suffering, no fear, no sickness, no old age, no death. Okay? Well, the Buddha also tells us that Nibbana actually cannot be described completely and satisfactorily using words, because our language is too poor to express the absolute truth or the ultimate reality, which is beyond duality, beyond relativity, beyond good and evil, beyond right and wrong, beyond existence and non-existence, beyond logic and reasoning, beyond time and space. Therefore, Nibbana is to be experienced. Nibbana is to be realized. When we have totally eliminated the causes of suffering, the poisons of greed, anger, and delusion, we will experience Nibbana for ourselves. So right now we're just using language to try to describe it. So in time to come, we will say goodbye, samsara. Hello, Nibbana. Let us therefore walk the path to free our mind, to liberate our mind from suffering and realize the unconditioned state of perfect peace and happiness. Okay, so we're still on Third Noble Path. We started off by looking at the end of suffering. We talk about 3 levels of happiness in this life, in future lives, and happiness of liberation. Then we talk about practicing the Buddha's teaching, right? Practicing the Buddhist path enable us to achieve happiness of morality, happiness of mental purity by avoiding evil, doing good, and purifying the mind. Then we talk about the ultimate happiness, Nibbana, 7 expressions, and 2 ways of understanding. Nibbana with the remainder of life, and Nibbana without remainder of life, and that's Parinibbana or final Nibbana. So actually, we've been talking about happiness, So let us talk more about happiness. The final section on the Third Noble Truth, right? Let's put it in the context of happiness before we move on to the 4th Noble Truth. So here we are saying that the Buddhist path to the ultimate happiness of liberation, which is Nibbana or enlightenment, is actually not through suffering, right? But through happiness. Why? The Buddha tells us that it is only when we do not give up happiness, which is in accord with the teaching, with the Buddha's teaching, with the Dharma, then our effort will be fruitful. This means that when we practice more and more and more, we will be experiencing more and more happiness, happiness of morality, happiness of mental purity. Therefore, happiness is indispensable when we practice. Happiness is always there. We are always transforming suffering to happiness when we practice. It's just through higher and higher levels of happiness. So you yourself, as much as anybody else in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection, right? We should be happy, happier and happier when we put the Buddha's teachings into practice. It is not through suffering, but through happiness that the Buddha penetrated the truth of suffering. So the Buddha tells us that I do not say that the breakthrough to the 4 Noble Truths is accompanied by suffering or displeasure. Rather, the breakthrough to the 4 Noble Truths is accompanied only by happiness and joy. So again, here the Buddha is telling us that when we practice better and better, when our spiritual cultivation is better and better, our suffering will lessen and our happiness will increase until we reach the ultimate level of happiness, right? So again, this is what we mean by the concept of happiness, true happiness. Okay, so a happy person is happy not because everything is right in his life. He's happy because his attitude towards everything in his life is right. His attitude towards everything in his life is right. How do we gain that? By understanding the Buddha's teachings and by putting it into practice. Then we'll be like the picture on the left, right? The person or the monk practicing and then attaining higher levels of happiness. And one day, the lotus, right? Representing awakening, enlightenment. Well, in the Buddhist text, we also have a king in ancient India by the name of King Pasenadi. He told the Buddha that, whenever he saw Buddhists and monks and nuns, right? They are always smiling and cheerful, sincerely joyful, plainly delighting their faculties, fresh, living at ease, unruffled. So when we practice well, right, that's how our demeanor, our disposition should be light and happy, right? And not, life is suffering, right? No point practicing, right? If the more we practice, the more suffering we experience. The more we practice, the lighter, calmer, and more peaceful we should experience, right? The happier, the more wholesome we should be. Okay, so again, this is what we mean by happiness, true happiness. So in our quest for the highest happiness, which is Nibbana, the decisive turning point is not fear, but a real encounter with suffering. We have suffering, but we face it and then we overcome it. So when we are confronted with suffering, the sequence is not one of suffering, but degree of happiness leading to the highest happiness. So whenever we experience suffering, we should accept it. We should accept our suffering. We should embrace it, which means that we should understand the nature and cause of the suffering, just like a mother embracing a baby when the baby is crying, right? To understand why the baby is crying. So we should accept our suffering. We should embrace it, understanding the nature and cause of the suffering, then transform it. When we understand it, we transform it from suffering to happiness, and then we let go. So if we can do this, accept, embrace, transform, and let go of our suffering, we will attain more happiness, true happiness, and one day, the ultimate happiness. Again, happiness is not the absence of problems, it's the ability to deal with our problems, our suffering. And here we have a saying from the 14th Dalai Lama. I'm sure you all know him. He was born in 1935, and so he's 87 years old now. Probably, right, the most famous Buddhist personality today. After that, followed by Master Thich Nhat Hanh. And he's been a Dalai Lama since the age of 5, right, in 1940. So he's been a Dalai Lama for 82 years now, right? He's 87 years old now. He tells us that happiness is not something ready-made. It comes from our own actions. All right? So we should therefore constantly cultivate the happiness of morality by avoiding evil, by doing good. We should constantly cultivate the happiness of mental purity by purifying our mind to attain a calm, clear, and compassionate mind so that we can further develop wisdom and realize the ultimate happiness of Nibbana. So this process is a gradual refinement, a gradual sublimation of happiness. That means our happiness becomes more and more subtle until it reaches the highest level of happiness. Again, the Dalai Lama tells us a disciplined mind leads to happiness, and an undisciplined mind leads to suffering. Okay, so the more disciplined our mind is, the happier we will be, and the more unruly or undisciplined our mind is, the more we will suffer. The Buddha taught us one who pursues happiness will certainly obtain happiness. This is the process from suffering to happiness to wisdom to Nibbana. So a man once told Buddha, I want happiness. Buddha replied, first remove I, because that's our ego, that's our self. Then remove one, because that's our desire. And now we're only left with happiness. So easy, right? Remove I, remove desire or craving, right? And then we're left with happiness. Okay? So our ego, our self, our craving leads to suffering. Once we can remove that, we will have happiness. So the idea is from suffering to happiness, to wisdom, to nibbana. And this is also something that is mentioned in the Buddhist text known as Upanisa Sutta. So let us take a look at it. Yeah, let's start off with the bottom, the pink arrow, right? See, that's suffering. Okay. So when we encounter a suffering, we develop faith. You see the pink arrow pointing to the right column. Okay. Then from faith, we develop contentment. From contentment, we develop rapture. From rapture, we develop calmness. From calmness to bliss. And from bliss to samadhi. Okay. So faith to samadhi, that represents 6 stages. And that represents happiness. Yeah, from suffering, we develop happiness as seen in faith, contentment, rapture, calmness, bliss, samadhi. And then from happiness, we move to wisdom. So that's the next 5 stages, right? Wisdom sight to see truth, to disenchantment with the 3 poisons, to dispassion, right? Or to equanimity, to deliverance of freedom, and then to wisdom that initiates the end of suffering, and then finally to nibbana. Okay, so wisdom, there are 5, right? So again, from suffering, when we encounter suffering, when we embrace it, we transform it, we will move along the way through stages of happiness, faith, contentment, rapture, calmness, bliss, samadhi. Then we'll move on to wisdom, 5 stages, wisdom sight to see truth, disenchantment, dispassion, deliverance, wisdom that initiates cessation, and then nibbana. So happiness through happiness, right? Transforming suffering to happiness, to wisdom, to nibbana. Okay, so that's how we can understand this transformation, these different levels of happiness. Okay, so the arising of higher levels of happiness, therefore, is not something supernatural, right? Or not something beyond us, but it is a natural consequence. As long as we put the Buddha's teachings into practice, we will experience happiness just at different levels, right? Depending on our level of practice. Well, the Dalai Lama tells us the purpose of our lives is to be happy, right? Yes, and happiness is the highest form of health. It is just part and parcel of the fruits that we will taste when we practice. And Master Thich Nhat Hanh tells us the present moment is filled with joy and happiness. If we are attentive, we will see it. So joy and happiness is always there. It's just whether we see it or not, right? And that is based on our attitude towards life, right? The way we understand the world. Therefore, every moment that we practice is a moment of happiness. Every moment that we are fully present, awake and mindful is a moment of happiness. And every moment that we transform suffering to happiness is a moment of happiness. Therefore, from this perspective, there is no path to happiness. Happiness itself is the path. Okay? So what we are saying is that as Buddhism, as Buddhists, right? We may be where we are now, right? We are in various stages of suffering, but when we practice, we are not saying that happiness can be only attained 5 years from now, right? Or I have no time to practice now, only when I retire, I can practice. Yeah, so happiness to us only at a certain stage. No, when we practice, every moment of joy, of happiness is available to us if we know how to experience it. And therefore, every pebble that we walk, right? Every moment of the life, every pebble of the path in life is happiness itself. So in this way, we can say that, there's no way or path to happiness. Happiness is the way. Happiness is every moment of our life. Okay, so Master Thich Nhat Hanh uses the same analogies. There's no path to peace. The path is peace. Why? So here, when we are saying that there's no path to peace, we are saying that, peace is only at the end of something that we do, right? But Peace can only be attained if every moment we are peaceful, right? We have peace. So every moment that we have peace, we have happiness, we have joy, that is the experience of peace and joy and happiness. Okay. So happiness or peace or joy is the way. Yeah, we're not waiting in the future, then we experience peace or happiness. Okay. So we should all be very happy now, right? We're talking about third and fourth noble truth. We have been talking so much about happiness, different levels, different ways of understanding happiness. Happiness, true happiness. Okay, so now we can move on to climb the steps, right? The fourth noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path, and the middle way. So again, the last 2 weeks, we've talked about the first two noble truths, understanding suffering and the cause of suffering. And then we've talked about the three universal characteristics, right? The three Dharma seals of impermanence, suffering, and not self, because we have not fully understood and realized it. That's why we are still in this mundane world of suffering, this wheel of life. But there's an end to our suffering, and that's the third noble truth. Yeah, that's at the top, nirvana, the sun shining, yeah, with happiness, supreme bliss, supreme happiness. Now, what we need to do is to walk up the flight of steps. And that's the fourth noble truth, the path leading to the end of suffering. And that is also called the middle way. So this is what we are going to look at now. Well, in the Buddhist text, it describes the fourth noble truth as follows. This is the noble truth of the way leading to the end of suffering. The Noble Eightfold Path, you can follow the picture on the right, yeah? Namely, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. So there are 8 aspects. That's why we call it the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, we also use the term the middle way to refer to the Noble Eightfold Path, the path leading to the end of suffering. The picture on the left, the middle way. Because it is the path of moderation, we go beyond extremes, right? We remove our afflictions, our defilements, our fires of greed, anger, delusion, which are the causes of our suffering, through a path transcending the extremes. And this middle way can be practiced in our approach to life, in our attitude towards life, towards all things, towards all experiences. And in this context, we are talking about avoiding 2 extremes. One is the extreme of self-indulgence in the pleasures of our senses. Look at the picture on the right, right? Our whatever pleasure that we derive from our senses, we want more and more and more of it. That's one extreme, self-indulgence in the pleasures of the senses. And the other extreme is self-torture, or self-torture in the practice of austerities, right? We try to sleep on nails or do all kinds of things to try to free our body from the mind, right? Which in ancient India, some people practice that. So that represents another extreme. So the middle way, the Noble Eightfold Path, steers away from both extremes. It is a path of moderation. The usual example used is the 3 strings of a lute, a musical instrument, right? Well, if the strings are too tight, yeah, there will be no music. It's like if we are torturing ourselves, right? Practicing self-mortification. Well, if the 3 strings are too loose, yeah, there's also no music. So this represents overindulgence in our sensual pleasures. So only when we have the strings just rightly tuned, then the music will come. The music of happiness, the music of nibbana, and that's the middle way. So it's just like guitar, right? Maybe guitar is easier to understand. We have to tune it properly, or our piano, right? We have to tune it properly. Then we have very nice, beautiful music that calms our mind, that brings happiness to our minds. So the middle way. All right. So we see the Noble Eightfold Path as a comprehensive path and integrated therapy to cure our disease of suffering by eliminating its causes. And it enables us to do so by applying the treatment to both our body, which refers to our actions and our words and our speech, our bodily actions and our speech, and the treatment also apply to our mind. So avoid evil, do good. That's basically purifying our body, bodily actions and speech, and then purifying the mind, right? And in this context, the Noble Eightfold Path is divided into 3 ways of practice. We have morality or good conduct or ethical discipline. In Pali, is known as Shila, Chinese Jie, right? So here we have right speech, right action, right livelihood. Next, we have mental development, samadhi. Sometimes it's translated as concentration. In Chinese, it's ting. And there are 3 aspects to it: right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. And then finally, we have wisdom or panya, or in Pali, prajna, right? In Sanskrit, in Chinese, is hui, jie ting hui. And here we have right understanding or right view, and right thought or right intention. Okay, so these are the 3 ways of practice in the Noble Eightfold Path. Well, we usually say that the Noble Eightfold Path begins with wisdom. Yeah, so you see here, beginning with the biggest rocks, right? Wisdom. Because with right understanding or right view and right thought or right understanding, that will provide us the correct direction, the correct path, the correct orientation to the other 6 steps. So from wisdom, we cultivate purifying our mind and bodies through the other 6 steps. We purify our physical body, right? So that it will be easier for us to purify our minds, and that's through ethical conduct, right speech, right action, right livelihood. And then we develop our minds so that we can realize wisdom, nibbana, and that's through concentration or mental development, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. Okay. And yes, here's another way of representing the Noble Eightfold Path, Dharma wheel. What we're saying is that the Noble Eightfold Path should not be understood simply as linear stages in which we complete one before moving on to the next. It is more like the 8 significant dimensions of our behavior, the 8 spokes of a wheel, mental, spoken, and bodily, and they are all operating. When we turn the wheel, they're all operating at the same time. They're all dependent on one another to complete our way of living. So we do not start off by practicing right speech first and then move on to right action or so, right? We try to do them all at the same time. We are improving different dimensions of our behavior. And the more we do it, like turning the wheel, right? You'll become more smoother and smoother until we reach nibbana, happiness through happiness. Okay, you're with me so far? I think quite easy to understand, right? This lecture, especially the 4th Noble Truth, the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so for the rest of our talk this evening, we will talk about morality. And then next week, right, we will talk about mental development and wisdom. So yes, morality, we're referring to right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Ethical conduct or ethical discipline, good conduct. And this forms the foundation of our further progress on the Buddhist path of our personal development. It is the foundation, it is the basis of all virtues, all attainments, from the worldly, mundane to the supramundane, from success and good fortune to skill in meditation, and ultimately wisdom and enlightenment. It is just like the earth, right? That is the basis. That is the foundation of all things. So we have morality, mental development, wisdom, like a pyramid, and at the bottom of it all, it is morality. Now, morality is built on the conception of universal love and compassion for all living beings. Yeah, and that's how the Buddha's teaching is based. And the aim of our Buddhist practice, the aim of the Buddhist life, is to develop both qualities equally, compassion and wisdom. Compassion includes love, generosity, kindness, tolerance, and other virtuous qualities, more to do with the emotional aspects of our heart. And wisdom represents the intellectual aspects of our mind. Okay, so this is what our Buddha's teaching is based on: compassion and wisdom, and it will lead us to fully experience, fully realize compassion and wisdom. So it is just like two wings of a bird. We need both to fly, right? To attain nibbana. So in this context, we have this French Tibetan monk by the name of Matthew Ricard. He tells us that wisdom and compassion should become the dominating influences that guide our thoughts, our words, and our actions. Maybe you have heard of him. He is a French person who at the age of 26 in 1972, he obtained a PhD in molecular genetics. He's born in 1946, so he's 76 years old now. After that, he gave it up. He went to Nepal. He became a monk in the Tibetan tradition. Yeah, and from 1989 onwards, he's the official French interpreter for the Dalai Lama. He has given many teachings and written many books on Buddhism. Okay, so always bear in mind compassion and wisdom and compassion. Now let's talk about morality again. Moral teachings of the major religions of the world, they all share a high degree of agreement. Why do we say so? Because underlying the rules of good conduct, right, no matter what religion, are two principles, and that's the principles of equality and the principle of reciprocity. The principle of equality tells us that all living beings are the same in their basic outlook. We all want to be happy. We all want to avoid suffering and death. And the principle of reciprocity tells us that just as we would not like to be abused, robbed, injured, or killed, so all other living beings are unwilling to have such things happen to them. Therefore, we should not act towards others in a way that we would not want them to act towards us. I'm sure you have heard about this, right? So in all the major religions, yeah, they all have this teaching. Okay, so the principle of equality, all of us do not want to have suffering and death, and reciprocity, we should not do unto others what we do not want others to do unto us. Now, let us then move on to take a look at the three aspects of right speech, right actions, and right livelihood. The Buddhist ethical and moral conduct aims at promoting harmony and happiness for the life of the individual and society. Morality forms the indispensable foundation for all higher spiritual attainments. Okay, right speech. We understand, right, the power of the speech, and we should not underestimate the power of speech. Yeah, if we use harsh words that can hurt, yeah, much more sometimes than a weapon. If we use a gentle word that can change the heart and mind of perhaps even a criminal, a hardened criminal. And so, if we wish to create a society in which communication, cooperation, harmony, and well-being goals to be attained, we must control, cultivate, and use our speech in helpful ways. So when we talk about right speech, we are talking about respect for truth and respect for the well-being of others. And there are four aspects of right speech, yeah, four kinds of speech that we should avoid. We should avoid, number one, lying. Therefore, we should speak the truth. We should avoid backbiting or slander or tale-bearing or divisive speech. Therefore, we should use words that are pleasant, friendly, and benevolent. Number three, we should avoid harsh speech. Therefore, we should speak gently and courteously. And number four, we should avoid idle, frivolous, vain talk or gossip, right? Therefore, we should speak at the right time and right place. If we cannot say something useful, it is better to keep noble silence. So this chart is from a sutta, right? Before we speak, let's assess, is it true or not true? If it's not true, don't speak. If it's true, is it going to benefit somebody or not beneficial? If it's not beneficial, don't speak. If it's beneficial, will it be accepted by the person? Then, if it's not accepted, wait for the right time, right? Keep noble silence first, and when the right time comes, we speak. If it's accepted by the person, then speak. Before we speak, think of the acronym THINK. Think, right? T represents, is it true? H, is it helpful? I, is it inspiring? N, is it necessary? And K, is it kind? If it's not true, not helpful, not inspiring, not necessary, not kind, keep silent. Silence is sometimes the best answer, right? The Dalai Lama teaches us. Okay. Well, the Buddha said, pleasant speech is as sweet as honey, truth speech is beautiful like a flower, and wrong speech is unwholesome like filth. So, perfect speech or right speech is one that is truthful, affectionate, helpful, and which promotes concord or peace, harmony, and unity. It reflects inner wisdom, clear vision, and Buddha nature, and represents the ideal of human communication. Imperfect speech or wrong speech is untruthful, harsh, harmful, and which promotes discord, disharmony, and disunity. So, of course, we should go for right speech. Now, let's move on to right action. There are three aspects of it. Right action is aimed at honoring, at promoting honorable and peaceful conduct. The three aspects of right action, we should avoid killing, right, or harming living beings. That means that we should respect life. We should avoid stealing. That means avoid taking what is not given. That means we should respect property. And we should avoid sexual misconduct. That means we should respect personal relationships. Okay? Well, the Dalai Lama gives us 3 R's. Respect for self, respect for others, and responsibility for all our actions. When we practice gratefulness, there's a sense of respect towards others. So practicing gratefulness is actually a very good and sort of easy way to practice. Yeah. So remember, respect for self, respect for others, and responsibility for all our actions. From then, we move on to right livelihood. Now, right livelihood is an extension of the rules of right action to our roles as breadwinners in our society. We should, of course, earn a living in a way that does not violate this basic moral values. So in this regard, we should avoid 5 kinds of trade, right? 5 kinds of occupation. That's number 1, dealing with lethal weapons or dealing with arms. Number 2, dealing with intoxicants, intoxicating drinks. Intoxicants would also include drugs, right? Drugs and alcohol. We should avoid trade dealing with poisons. We should avoid trade killing animals, right? Animals for slaughter. And we should avoid cheating human beings or slavery or human trafficking, right? Of course, until now, right, we still have human trafficking, forced labor, we talk about forced prostitution, we talk about all kinds of scams. So we should avoid all these 5 kinds of trades because they contribute to the ills of, they result in the ills of society, they violate the rules of respect for life and for the welfare of others, they lead to insecurity, discord, and suffering in the world. Okay, so we have talked about morality as the foundation of it all. We have talked about right speech, right action, and right livelihood. Now, let us then move on to the next and final part, faith and the precepts of morality. Yeah, the importance of faith and the importance of precepts. The starting point of the Buddhist path is, of course, having faith in the Triple Gem. By the term Triple Gem or the 3 jewels, right? San Bao, we're talking about the Buddha, his teaching, that means the Dharma, and the community of those who have followed and realized the teachings, the Sangha. So Buddhist texts, well, when we talk about faith, right? Buddhist texts understand faith in the Buddha and Dharma in terms of trust, with confidence, with affection. We have devotion inspired by the person of the Buddha and his teachings. And faith is this confidence that there is indeed a path leading to the end of suffering. This path has been walked by the Buddha, this path has been walked by his followers, and this path can be walked by us. Okay? And the traditional way to express our faith, to express our commitment to the Buddhist path is the act of going to the Triple Gem for refuge. Some of you may have already taken refuge in the Triple Gem, right? So I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the Sangha, or if you're familiar in Pali, Buddham Saranam Gacchami, Dhamman Saranam Gacchami, Sangham Saranam Gacchami, or 皈依佛, 皈依法, 皈依圣. All right. Then we talk about Buddhist acts, such as going for refuge, taking the precepts, chanting sutras. They are all expressions of deep faith, of our trust and confidence in the Buddha's teachings. When we do this, they soothe and settle our mind. They keep our mind free of fear, and in this way, protect our mind from unwholesomeness. And therefore, we say that they have a protective quality. They are important preliminary practices in arousing, in inspiring our confidence and trust, and in preparing our mind for the higher stages of Buddhist meditative practice. So we have the phrase, on the long journey of human life, faith is the best of companions. So we start off with faith, and from faith we seek refuge, and then we move on to precepts, taking precepts. So now let us briefly examine the precepts of morality, right? So we have the 5 precepts, the 10 causes of unwholesome action, the 8 precepts, the 10 precepts for monks and nuns, vegetarianism. The Buddha tells us that one who abides by the precepts experiences a blameless happiness within. A blameless happiness within means the happiness of morality. All right. So what are the 5 precepts? I think we are all very familiar, right? No killing, no stealing, no sexual misconduct, no lying, no intoxicants. It means respect for life, respect for others' property, respect for our pure nature, respect for honesty, respect for a clear mind. In Chinese Mahayana Buddhism, if you have taken refuge, you can wear the black robe, Hai Qing. You see this woman wearing in here, right? And then on top of it, if you have taken the 5 precepts, you can wear the brown robe, the covering brown robe, and that's called Man Yi. So if you go to a Chinese Mahayana temple, when you see people wearing this, you know that they have sought refuge and they have taken the 5 precepts. Okay, let's move on to the 10 unwholesome action. And these are the kinds of behavior that the precepts are intended to prevent us from committing. So the unwholesome as karmas or unwholesome actions are harming life, taking what is not given, that is stealing, sexual misconduct, false speech, divisive speech, harsh speech, gossip, and then covetousness or greed, ill will, hatred, wrong view, or delusion. So we have 3 unwholesome actions referring to the body, 4 referring to speech, and 3 to our mind. Yeah. So here we find that they include the 5 precepts. Yeah, the 5 precepts and 10 causes of action. They represent the right speech and right action of the Noble Eightfold Path that we talked about earlier on. So from 5 precepts and 10 unwholesome actions, let us move on to the 8 precepts. Okay, so lay people, we can take the 5 precepts whenever you're ready. And then sometimes, or on special occasions, or when we go for meditation retreats, right, we may want to take the 8 precepts. So that's why I said for serious yogis. The first 5 are the same, okay, except that instead of sexual misconduct, it is no sex at all. So that is celibacy. So sexual misconduct in the 8 precepts is celibacy or no sex at all, no sexual activity at all. And then there's 3 more: no eating after noon, and then no entertainment of any kind, no beautification or adornments like jewelry or perfume of any kind, and not sleeping on luxurious high or large beds. So this is what we call the 8 precepts, which every now and then we may want to do. And then we have the 10 precepts, and that is practiced by novice monks and novice nuns. Sometimes maybe some of you may have gone for short-term novice monks or novice nuns programs, right? And when you are on this program, you have to take the 10 precepts. This is basically the same as the 8 precepts. Yeah. So you see number 1 to number 6 is exactly the same. Number 7, for the 8 precepts, number 7 is broken into A and B. For the 10 precepts, number 7 is stated as number 7 and 8. Number 9 is the same, and then number 10 is not to use money. Okay, so that's the 10 precepts. And maybe when you go to countries like Myanmar, Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, you may see this women, right, clad in this way. These are Theravadin women who have pledged to keep the 8 or 10 precepts on a longer term basis. In Sri Lanka, they are known as Dasa Silmata. In Thailand, they are known as Mei Chi. In Cambodia, they are known as Don Chi. In Laos, they are known as Mekau. And in Myanmar, they are known as Tilashin. So Tilashin of Myanmar, they are on the right, the pictures. And then in the other countries, they are mainly in white. Only in Myanmar, they are in sort of pink robes. Okay. So we have talked about 5 precepts, 10 causes of unwholesome action. We have talked about 8 precepts. We have talked about 10 precepts. Now let us just briefly mention precepts for monks and nuns. If anyone of you in future wish to be a monk or nun, then if you are in the Theravada tradition, you observe 227 rules for monks and 311 for nuns. If you are in the Mahayana tradition, the Chinese Mahayana tradition, there are 250 rules for monks and 348 for nuns. Yeah, this is taken from the Dhammagupta. So on the left, that's from the Theravadin text. On the right, commands for the creation of virtue. That's taken from the Dhammagupta Vinaya or codes of conduct for Mahayana monks. And if you wish to be in the Tibetan tradition, there are 258 rules for monks and 366 for nuns. All right, so these are the precepts for monks and nuns in the Theravadin tradition, Mahayana tradition, and Tibetan tradition. Sounds like a lot, right? But once you're in it, it's actually not too bad, yeah? Because most of these rules, even as a normal lay person, we will not be breaking them. Okay, let us then talk about vegetarianism. Well, in the Buddhist text, there are no direct prescription against the eating of meat in the earliest Buddhist text, right? That means in early Buddhist texts, they did not say that we should avoid vegetarianism. Buddhists and monks, because they are dependent on whatever alms that are given to them, they are encouraged not to be choosy, and they are permitted to accept all kinds of food, or what we call blameless meat. Now, blameless meat refers to food that they had not seen, heard, or suspected that the creature had been specifically killed to feed them. Yeah. So in early times, in today's times too, Theravadin tradition, right? They practice this. They can take meat, that is offered to them, but this meat should be blameless. It should not be meat that they had seen, or heard, or suspected that the animal or the creature has been killed specifically to offer alms to them. So that's one way of taking a look at vegetarianism, still practiced by in the Theravadin tradition. Well, in ancient times, at the same time, in ancient texts, Mahayana texts, vegetarian is widely seen as appropriate in response to the first precept. Yeah, Buddhism and vegetarianism. How can we explore one of the core Buddhist values of not harming? So eating no meat is respected as furthering our aspiration to live with compassion without harming living creatures. So, for instance, when we look at an old Mahayana sutta like the Lankavatara Sutra, it argues against meat eating. It tells us why we should not eat meat, because all beings have been relatives in a past life. Meat is smelly, eating it hinders our meditation and leads to bad health. It leads to arrogance and rebirth as carnivorous animals or deprived humans. So even in ancient times, right, in the Mahayana context, Buddhist texts advocated vegetarianism. So may all that have life be delivered from suffering. And that continues in Mahayana Buddhism today. It is the norm for Buddhist monastics community, for Buddhist monks and nuns. And if there may also be lay followers who want to take this to be vegetarian, right? For Buddhist monks and nuns in the Mahayana tradition, besides taking the rules that we talked about earlier on, we are also required to take what we call bodhisattva precepts. And one of these bodhisattva precepts is to be vegetarian. Okay, so there are altogether 58 bodhisattva precepts which Mahayana monks and nuns also have to take. Now, of course, any one of us can choose to be vegetarian whenever we like, right? Maybe occasionally, maybe a few times a week, as we become more and more familiar with the taste of vegetarian food. Actually, we can, it tastes perfectly normal. It tastes very good. And over time, maybe we can then slowly become vegetarian for a longer and longer periods. Now that I've been vegetarian for a number of years, right? I find just the idea of eating meat not very receptive at all, yeah? So it's just really just a matter of practice, just a matter of habits. Okay, so we have talked about vegetarianism, and now we are winding up the talk. So we've talked about faith, we've talked about the practice and precepts of morality. If we have faith and we take and we do the practice and precepts of morality, it will create an inner sense of calmness, tranquility, stability, security, and strength arising from within us and in our relationships with other people. And once we've developed this inner peace, we can more successfully follow the other steps of the path to cultivate the various aspects of mental development and to achieve wisdom. So the next steps of mental development, the next 3 steps of mental development and the next 2 steps of wisdom, we will talk about it next week. Well, the Buddha said, one who practices morality will feel like a king, duly crowned and with his enemies subdued. Such a person will feel at ease and at peace. Such a person will experience the happiness of morality. Well, the mirror of happiness. To strengthen the faith in the Buddha Dharma, a lay follower should realize that true happiness lies within his own mind, his or her own mind. By following the way taught by the Buddha, he or she can experience this peace and happiness. This happiness, when it is radiated on others, will multiply in the minds of others and will then be reflected back to him or her again. The mind of faith is pure and gentle, always patient and enduring, never arguing, never causing suffering to others, but always pondering on the triple gem. On life's journey, faith is nourishment. Virtuous deeds are a shelter. Wisdom is the light by day and night. Mindfulness is the protection by night. If a person lives a pure life, nothing can destroy him or her. That's part of Buddha's teachings. That's what we've been talking about, and we'll talk about it again next week. And that may explain why the Dalai Lama always tells us, I believe that the only true religion consists of having a good heart. Yeah, all religion tells us about cultivating a good heart. And in this context, it says that any true religion, a religion is true if it consists of having a good heart. And therefore, the Dalai Lama tells us every day, think as we wake up. Today, I'm fortunate to be alive. I have a precious human life. I'm not going to waste it. I'm going to use all my energies to develop myself, to expand my heart out to others, to achieve enlightenment for the benefit of others, for the benefit of all beings. I'm going to have kind thoughts towards others. I'm not going to get angry or think badly about others. I'm going to benefit others as much as I can. Okay, on this note, let us remind ourselves what we have covered in this lecture. We started off with a review of the last lecture. Then we move on to take a look at the third noble truth, the end of suffering, talking about 3 levels of happiness in this life, in future lives, happiness of liberation. We have also talked about the happiness of morality and happiness of mental purity. And this means avoid evil, do good, purify the mind. We've talked about Nibbana, right? Because that's the third noble path, yeah, the end of all suffering, Nibbana. We've looked at 7 expressions used for it. The end of the 3 unwholesome factors of greed, hatred, and delusion, the highest wholesomeness, the end of karma, the highest level of knowledge, freedom from views, world transcendence, unconditioned. We've looked at 2 ways of understanding Nibbana, Nibbana with the remainder of life and Nibbana without remainder of life. That is Pari-Nibbana, or the final Nibbana, when one have our last breath and no longer being reborn in this wheel of life. We've looked at happiness, true happiness, suffering. When we are confronted, we should accept it, embrace it, understand the nature and cause of the suffering, transform it from suffering to happiness and let go. We should cultivate the happiness of morality, avoid evil, do good. We should cultivate the happiness of mental purity by purifying our mind so that we can further develop wisdom and realize the ultimate happiness of Nibbana. Then we move on to take a look at the 4th noble truth, the Noble Eightfold Path and the Middle Way, talking about morality, good conduct, ethical discipline, mental development, wisdom, right? 3 aspects of morality, 3 of mental development, 2 of wisdom, adds up to 8. And we focus on morality, right speech, right action, right livelihood, 4 aspects of right speech, the avoidance of lying, backbiting, divisive speech, harsh speech, idle, frivolous talk, gossip. 3 aspects of right action, avoidance of killing, stealing, sexual misconduct. 5 aspects of right livelihood, the avoidance of trades in little weapons, arms, animals for slaughter, slavery or human trafficking, poisons and intoxicants, including drugs and alcohol. Then we ended with faith and the precepts of morality. 5 precepts, 10 causes of unwholesome action. 8 precepts, 10 precepts, precepts for monks and nuns, vegetarians. Yay, we are done. I think I've bored you enough with this long talk. Now, you're happy? Q&A, if you have any. Again, if it causes you suffering thinking about Q&A, then please, I can liberate you from your suffering now. We can do some meditation, yeah? It's up to you, whatever you want, okay? Okay, I think we have enough of suffering. Just listen to me. Yeah? So maybe if no Q&A, yeah, sorry. Any Q&A?
Venerable, I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, hi. I'd like to know, how does wishing well towards others, is this like some kind of energy flow? How does it affect? I'd like to share, because at the workplace, what happened was there was quite a bit of discord in my team itself. And it was really almost like a living, it was really horrible to the extent that I wanted to quit the job actually.
Okay.
And luckily, I happened to hear a talk from one of the venerables from KMS also, who said, if you do not know how to swim, it doesn't make a difference if you change the swimming pool.
Mm.
So meaning even if I change the job, I will still need to learn that lesson. So apparently all of us have our own specific tuition lessons, I guess, in life. Yeah. So and one thing that I learned was to wish good to that person. So initially I was like, this person is really making my life so difficult, and I'm supposed to wish that person well every day. But apparently a few months on, miraculously, after her bad attitude and the way she spoke, one day she actually started to smile and be nice again. So I was like, wow. So every day now in the morning, I will actually wish like her name and all my colleagues, everyone well, and hope that everyone have good encounters today. And somehow it just works. So I'd like to share everyone here. So maybe Venerable can explain to us how does this energy flow? Yeah, so everyone can benefit. Thank you.
Well, congratulations. You have transformed suffering to happiness, right? Like we said, whenever we confront suffering, accept it, face it, like what you have done, embrace it. You have done that by understanding a nature, and then you transform it, right? By wishing them well. And then, yeah, after that, you can just let go of whatever suffering or whatever unhappiness, whatever problems. And sometimes it takes time, right, for it to experience, like you said, over a certain period. So this is the process, how it works. That's exactly how it works. Nobody really know. Of course, we always talk about positive and negative energies, right? So if we use negative energies to represent unwholesomeness and positive energies to represent wholesomeness, so whenever we are engaged in wholesome action, like what you did, wishing others well, which is also the main idea of metta meditation, isn't it? Yeah, wishing everybody well, happy, and whatnot. Then whenever we are engaged in wholesomeness, we are surrounding ourselves with positive energies. So if we are constantly surrounding ourselves with positive energy, then in a way we are protecting ourselves from negative energies. That's why we say that when we engage in wholesomeness, there is a certain protective quality, because that's just cause and effect, right? Whenever we do something good, whenever we plant a seed, it will, if it's an apple seed, it will lead to an apple fruit. So again, we plant a seed of wholesomeness, the fruit will be the fruit of wholesomeness. So yes, so maybe this analogy of positive energy, as wholesomeness, and negative energy as unwholesomeness, may all help us to understand it better, right? Well, the world is so complex that even now, quantum physics cannot really tell us all the intricate details. But, I mean, we don't really have to care so much about the details. We know how to use our handphone, right? Without knowing all the technicalities of how it works. So be it. If we understand the law of cause and effect, transform unwholesomeness to wholesomeness, transform self-centeredness to selflessness, we are transforming suffering to happiness and going through higher and higher levels of happiness. That's a very good example, to encourage and motivate all of us, right? So don't give up. Very good.
Thank you.
Any more words of encouragement? You see, I'm so happy. There's concrete examples from you. Okay, if not, maybe we want to practice, like what you say, radiating.
Sorry, sure. There's a question inside the Zoom chat. Perhaps you can.
Okay, please read
it out. So, Shufu, I wish to clarify on the appearance for one attains Nibbana. Only mind or mind and body. Body is conditioned, subject to aging and death. I think she's looking for clarification of what that means.
Okay, yes. Now remember, when we talk about Nibbana, we're talking about the end, right? That we no longer, when somebody realizes Nibbana, the mind is totally freed from the three poisons of greed, anger, and delusion. And it is because of these three poisons of greed, anger, and delusion, that's why we have other defilements like jealousy, resentment, fear, anxiety, and whatnot. So when somebody is enlightened, the mind is totally free. So the mind is unconditioned. But because the person is still alive, the body is still in this world, right? So the body is conditioned. Okay, so that's why when we talk about Nirvana with the remaining of life, we're talking about this body still experiencing pain. But although the body still experiences pain, but the mind is free from suffering, free from pain. This is what we mean, right? When we're not enlightened, of course, when the body experiences pain, our mind also, is affected by it. But if you have been practicing meditation, you will know that, and this is used in psychotherapy, right? To cope with chronic pain. Psychotherapists, use this technique of meditation, because when our mind is calm, when our mind can sort of, in a way, be apart from the body, and the pain then becomes much more manageable. And if you can be in jhana, then you will not be in pain. Of course, when you're out of jhana, you will experience pain again. So the calmer our mind is, the more practice our mind is, the better we will be able to cope with pain. And this is verified by all research. This is used by psychotherapies for patients who have to deal with chronic pain. And it has been researched and documented that, yes, meditation helps us to cope better with pain. So from this perspective, we can perhaps then understand why for the perfectly enlightened one, right? Mind totally free already. The body may be suffering all the ravages of sickness, old age and whatnot, but the mind is at peace. Does this understand the concept of conditioned body and unconditioned mind? I hope so. Thank you for making this difference, right? The conditioned body and the unconditioned mind. Since we talk about Nibbana as the unconditioned, as one of the 7 expressions. So I think all of you know very well about Nibbana now, right? Different 7 ways of talking about it. And then while we're alive and while just the moments before we passed away. Happy. Let's experience more happiness.
Okay,
Yes.
Shifu, sorry, can I ask something?
Sure.
You know the 10 unwholesome karma, right? Can I clarify the part where like wrong view can cause bad karma? Like that one, the wrong view, is it like not knowing the 3 universal characteristics, that kind of wrong view?
Yes.
Are we like not always in wrong view? Because if we have right view, then
yes.
Like, how does it? Also, sorry, can I have a part 2 question? Like when we are angry, do we have bad karma? Like, if you're very annoyed and then you just like, this kind, does it create like bad karma?
Okay.
Yeah,
so
okay, thank you.
All right, very good. Yeah. Well, wrong view is sort of ordinary language, right? In the Buddhist context, when we talk about wrong view, you are right. It's like not understanding the 3 poisons, like we say, right? Thinking that our body is permanent, whatever we experience is pleasurable, and because there's a real self, right? But in reality, that's not. So wrong view actually refers to one of the 3 poisons of ignorance or delusion. Yeah, wrong view is just sort of a simpler word to embodies all this from the Buddhist context. So that's very good. You understand it very well. You have the right view. And second, you have also done very well, because whenever there's unwholesome feeling that arise, or unwholesome mindset, emotion that arise in us, such as anger, when it's just in our mind, right? And if we can catch it and be mindful of it, and then we do not further manifest it in speech or action, then whatever karma that is created to thought, they'll be just off. Karma will be more solidified if it's manifested in action. When you're so angry that you scold somebody, or you hit somebody, right? Speech, or you say something bad, then the karma then will be much more concrete. So that's why we say that it's very important to be mindful of our thinking, right? Of our thoughts, of our emotions. That's why we're practicing mindfulness of breath, of the body, mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of our emotions, of our states of mind. Once we're mindful of it, we know that anger is coming, fear is coming, jealousy is coming. We notice it, we try to let go of it, we try to transform it. And once we transform it, things will be fine. We're not perfect, so there's no way in which we can, every moment not have such unwholesomeness. But whenever we can catch it and then just leave it as it is, either by just letting go or just be more active in transforming it. When we have anger, we try to develop loving kindness. So these are all the Buddhist ways and practices of dealing with all this kind of unwholesomeness, yeah, anger or what. So again, you've done very well. When an anger comes, just see it as a thought and try just to let it go. Do not manifest it into speech, into action. You'll be fine, yeah. Every now and then, of course, something may happen, but it's okay. We notice it, we repent, we seek forgiveness for whoever we have offended. We forgive ourselves too. Yeah, we must be kind to ourselves and not just kind to others, and you will be fine. Yeah, all practice is like that. We are imperfect. That's why we're still in this world. So nothing wrong. Huh? So committing mistakes, having failures every now and then, that's perfectly fine. Do not set up such high standards that you must be perfectionistic. When we're perfectionistic, we create more suffering for ourselves and for the people around us. Don't you think so? Okay, so just be realistic. Do what we can.
Sifu, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Okay, I can understand the concept of impermanence and non-self, but then you see, it seems that consciousness have a kind of identity. You know, that's why we have Buddha, that's why we have karma. So I find it a bit difficult to reconcile this consciousness identity with non-self. So whether you can expand on it to further my understanding.
Okay, now, when we talk about this concept of self, right? Remember we said that in ancient times, we are really referring to a self that is unchanging, that is eternal, that is that is forever there. Yeah, there's nothing to be changed. It is just there, it is unchanging. Yeah. But in Buddhism, when we talk about consciousness, our consciousness also is impermanent every moment. So if our consciousness is impermanent every moment, then how can we have a permanent consciousness? If our consciousness is permanent, then what's the use of our practice? If our consciousness is, let's say, unwholesome, is always angry, is permanent, is unchanging, then why do we practice? Yeah, it is because our consciousness every moment is rising and falling, rising and falling. That's why, when we do mindfulness of breath, feelings, mind, we always say rising, falling, rising, falling. That's why we practice. Okay, so when we talk about the self, we have to understand in that context. Yeah. Now, of course, in the mundane world, like we said before, right, conventional language, we give ourselves an identity. I'm Chuan Sheng, you are who and what, so that we can communicate. But from ultimate reality, all our 5 aggregates, including consciousness, they are constantly changing. There may be a pattern at the macroscopic level when we see each other as identities, but at the microscopic level, science tells us that too, right? Quantum physics, yeah, our cells, our molecules, our atoms, they are constantly changing. There's actually nothing that is permanent. Reality depends on the consciousness, and because our consciousness, it depends on the observer, and because the consciousness of the observer is changing, reality is always changing.
Yes, I can understand this ever-changing concept, but then it seems that there is a kind of carry forward to the next life. That's why that's why we have a Buddha. We keep on practicing, changing, doing wholesome things. Then it's sort of this it seems that this wholesome things carry forward, maybe to our future lives. So it seems that there is some kind of identity being carried forward. I know there's this unchanging I know there's this changing consciousness every time. It's not constant. But then it seems that there's a kind of identity attached to this consciousness. That's why we have a Buddha. Buddha practiced throughout, through many lives. So it seems that there is some kind of continuation identity, consciousness. Of course, I know this consciousness is always changing. So is this continuity of of an identity which I don't quite able to reconcile with the concept, because non-self, I know you say it's nothing permanent, it's ever changing. That I can understand, but then it seems that there's this identity being carried forward That's why we are Buddha, because Buddha practiced wholesomeness from life after life. So there seems that there's some kind of continuity,
Okay.
So it's karma. So because people say, okay, you say non-self ever changing, then how come karma can be carried forward? Then how come karma can be carried forward? There's this part which I think quite a lot of lay people can't understand.
Okay, so yes, so remember we talk about Nibbana. One of the ways to express it is end of karma, and it is karma that leads us to be continually be reborn. And what is karma? Karma represents the moral dimension. Karma represents our habits and attitudes. So that's why it's important for us from young to develop good, wholesome attitudes, and then over time, right? We'll be better persons. So if we have unwholesome habits and attitudes, we don't change, that will carry on. So what is being carried on from life to life is our habits, our attitudes, and our habits and attitudes are basically the 5 aggregates. And because we do not realize that there is not self, we attach an identity to it. There is an I. So all this ever-changing 5 aggregates, which we call I, it keeps on bringing us from life to life. But once we truly understand, once we realize that ultimate truth is really not self, then we let go, then there's no more identity. Then the karma, the habits, the attitudes, the karma that bring us forth will end. So that's why nirvana is also end of karma. I know it's difficult to understand. Maybe we can all practice, and then one day we can all realize it. I can understand. This is a question that many people do ask.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we have passed our time, right? It's already 9:31. Maybe we'll just come straight to to our closing puja and then photo taking.
Yes, certainly. Venerable, maybe you can lead us in the closing puja.
Okay, let's start then. Okay, put our palms together and we'll pay respect, right? 3 bows to the Buddha. So yes, first bow, second bow, third bow. Okay, let's move on to express repentance for our past and present misdeeds. Palms together, recite. 往昔所造诸恶业，皆有无始贪嗔痴，从生语意自所生，一切我今皆忏悔。Bow. Let's express our resolve to practice the Buddha's path well. Palms together, recite. 众生无边誓愿度，烦恼无尽誓愿断，法门无量誓愿学，佛道无上誓愿成。Bow. Let's seek refuge in the triple gem. Palms together, recite. 自归依佛，当愿众生提结大道，发无上心。Bow. 自归依法，当愿众生深入经藏，智慧如海。Bow. 自归依僧，但愿众生同理大众，一切无碍，何难胜众。Bow. Finally, dedication of merits. Palms together, recite. 愿以此功德，普及于一切，佛灯与众生，皆共成佛道。Bow. Thank you once again. May all of you be well and happy. May all of you have the blessings of the triple gem. Photo taking time.
Thanks, Venerable. Before that, maybe let's give 3 bows to Venerable as well.
Okay, thank you.
First bow. Second bow. And third bow.
Thank you, right? I'm so full of gratitude and hence I'm full of happiness. Gratitude as a practice, remember.